All right, let's get back into the swing of things in Sugya 1.8, Part 1. Okay, the Gemara in the beginning of that was discussing the first of the Rabbi Yehudas. And that was, Rabbi Yehuda says, until Arba Shos, until 4 hours. Right? That was, of course, referring to Shachris. That Shachris, according to the first opinion, could be done until midday. That was the Chachamim, or the Tanakama, the first opinion. And Rabbi Yehuda says, no, until 4 hours. And we already discussed that that was a issue of the Karbanos, right? We already said that Rabbi Yehuda holds that the daily morning sacrifice was only until 4 hours, and therefore, likewise, Shachris is only until 4 hours. Right? We already discussed that earlier. Okay, now. The Gemara posed the question, we started this last week, but we'll try it again. Iboy lahu. And again, what does Iboy lahu mean? A question was raised. They posed the query that they wanted to know. Ad ve'ad bichlal. When the Mishnah said, when Rabbi Yehuda said, until 4 hours, did that mean up till 4 hours, and including the 4 hours? Up to ad, when the term ad, does that mean the ad bichlal, and up to and including, that's also included? O dilma, or perhaps ad velo ad bichlal, up to and not including. Okay. So the Gemara poses the following question. When Rabbi Yehuda says until 4 hours, does that mean up till but including, or up till and not including? So of course the difference is 1 whole hour, right? If you hold up till and including, that means you had until the end of the 4th hour. But if you hold up till and not including, that means you only have until the end of the 3rd hour, which is alias the beginning of the 4th hour. Okay. So this is, like we said, a very important question, especially to those who like to sleep a little later, right? Right? So this is a very important thing. The Gemara later on is, we haven't gotten there yet, but the Gemara later on is going to paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore we already have to move it up from chatzos, right? We have to move it until 4 hours. So now this is very important. Can we sleep until 9 o'clock or until 10 o'clock? It's a very important question. Okay. So now the Gemara is going to try to determine what does Rabbi Yehuda mean when he says ad. Okay? Now the Gemara has a right to assume that he's going to use that term universally the same. Meaning, if we find the term ad someplace else, and over there we can determine whether it means up till and including or up till and not including, the assumption is that okay, well, that means he's going to use it universally the same. So if he uses it one way over in a different area, he uses it one way, we can assume that he'll use it the same way here. Okay? So let's see if we can figure it out. Tashma. Come in here, a proof. Okay. Rabbi Yehuda says, ad plag ha-mincha. Until half of mincha. Right? Till half of mincha. Now, remember, and I'm going to put a parenthesis here, that the Gemara, what we mentioned in a few lines before, which is, Plag HaMincha, the Gemara is assuming, is not a midpoint. It is not a point in time, but rather a span of time, right? A span of time. And it's a half of the Mincha. Okay? And if you recall from the previous Gemara, the Gemara also said, from a Brisa, in fact, that he meant the latter half of Mincha, right? The second half of Mincha. Okay. Now, armed with that preface, let's now go on into this Gemara. Yosef, right? Yosef, right, there we go. You need some materials? Okay, we are just about to start the Tashma. We just started that. Okay? Now, so let's see this again. The Gemara uses typical Talmudic logic. The Gemara says, all right, let's think about this for a minute. Rabbi Yehuda says, ad plaga mincha, until half of mincha. Now we know that plaga mincha was the latter half of the mincha, right? That's what we established from the previous brisa. So the Gemara says, okay, I amrat bishlama. Now that's a funny way of saying it. Literally, if you would translate it, actually it would say, if you say it's good, but what it really means is, it's good if you say. Sometimes you have to translate Hebrew or Aramaic by phrases rather than the word by word. If you translate it word by word, it doesn't fly, right? For example, Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe Lemor. How do you translate that? And Hashem spoke to Moshe, right? Now, if you would translate it word for word, you would say, and spoke Hashem. Okay. Right? And spoke Hashem to Moshe, right? That's not English, right? You mean, and Hashem spoke, okay? The reason is because that in Hebrew and English, they switch around the subject and the verb. So that's the way that you have to translate from when you're translating from Hebrew or Aramaic into English, you have to do it by phrases rather than by word for word. It won't flow if you do it word for word. Okay. Anyway, I amrat bishlama. It's good if you say ad velo ad bichlal, up till and not including. Oh, then that's good. Hainu, that is diika, that there is a difference bein Rabbi Yehuda l'Rabbanan. That's why there is a distinction between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. What that means is, well, let's think about it. What did Rabbi Yehuda say for mincha? Until plag ha-mincha. Till half of mincha. Which half? The latter half. We said that in the brisa before, right? Okay. Now, let's think about that. So you have until the latter half of mincha, right? Till the latter half of mincha. That means from this yellow line till the end, right? Now, does he mean up till and including? Or up till and not including? Well, it has to be up till and not including. Has to be. Because if it was up till and including, that means until the latter half and including the latter half, then there's no difference between him and the Rabbanan, right? They both end at 12. So that makes no sense. How could he be arguing and saying the same thing? Right? So that's what the Gemara is saying. It's good if you say ad velo ad bichlal, up to and not including, then hainu, that is the ika, that there is a difference between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. Then there is a difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan. Then it plainly see, because Rabbi Yehuda would hold you have up till but not including. That means you have only until the beginning of the second half. Whereas the Rabbanan would hold you have until the end of the day, which it would be including the second half, all the way until 12. So then there's a difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan, obviously, because Rabbi Yehuda would hold that you have to stop at the midpoint, what we call plag ha-mincha, at 10 3/4 hours, whereas the Rabbanan would go all the way until 12. Good. Then it makes sense. But I amrat, if you would say ad ve'ad bichlal, if you would say up till and including, so when Rabbi Yehuda uses the term ad, he means up till and including. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda, hainu Rabbanan. That Rabbi Yehuda is the same as the Rabbanan. Because if you mean up till and including, So then Rabbi Yehuda would also be saying up till and including the second half, which would put him at the Rabbanon at 12. They both are saying 12. So that makes no sense. So therefore the Gemara says clearly from what Rabbi Yehuda says ad plag hamincha, what he says by mincha, clearly that the word ad over there must mean up till and not including. All right? Well, if so, presuming that he's going to use the word ad universally the same, well, if so then when Rabbi Yehuda says ad arba shos in the morning until 4 hours, clearly he means up till and not including the fourth hour. You only have until the beginning of the fourth hour to daven shacharis. Not good news for the guys who like to sleep a little later. Right? Good? All right. That's what we're holding. So we have what seems to be an absolute ironclad proof. How else could you learn from Plaga Mincha, right? There is no other way to learn, or at least so it would seem. Okay? Okay, so the Gemara says, you think you're so smart. You think you have me, right? Well, just a second here, chum. I ain't done with you yet. Gemara says, Elamai. Rather what? Ad velo ad bechlal. Aha. You say, it must be up to and, not including, right? That's what you just finished told me. So the Gemara says, well, just a second here. Ema Seifa. What does Ema Seifa mean? Let us say the Seifa, right? Ema, I'll tell you, or let us say the Seifa. The Seifa means the end of the Mishnah, okay? Okay? In other words, okay, the middle of the Mishnah, which just talks about Mincha, okay, good. Yeah, you seem to be right about that one, right? That there he seems to be using the word ad to mean up till but not including. Correct. But just a second, I ain't done. Because let's look at the Seifa, let's look at the end. Vishal Musafim Kol Hayom. There, the Mishnah said, when it was regarding to Musaf, of course that's referring to Rosh Chodesh, Shabbos, Yom Tov, when there is a Musaf. So the first opinion was Musafim can do it all day long. You can daven Musaf all day. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says, Ad Sheva Shos. Until 7 hours. Okay? Magic word ad. Until. Okay, now, do you have any proof from there right now, whether he means up till and including the 7th hour, or up till and not including the 7th hour? At this point, we would have said what? Up till and? Not including. Not including, right? That's what we would have said right now, right? Correct? However, it ain't so simple. In Talmud Bavli, nothing is so simple. The Gemara says, Vitanya. Okay, what does Vitanya mean? And we learned in a Brisa. Okay, so this is not in the Mishnah. This is a Brisa, which the Brisa is going to be telling something about this discussion. And let's see what the Brisa has to say, because obviously this is going to impact our discussion. What does the Brisa say? Vitanya. We learned in a Brisa as follows. Hayu lefanav shtei tfilos. There were before him 2 prayers. And what are those? Achas shel Musaf, achas shel Mincha. One of Musaf, one of Mincha. So he has 2 prayers before him. Meaning, he is now in a place in time where he has to daven both Musaf and Mincha. Okay? Now, which one should he do? Should he daven Musaf or should he daven Mincha? He's got to do both. Which one should he do? So says the Gemara, Mispalol shel Mincha. I shouldn't say the Gemara, I should say the Brisa. The Brisa says, Mispalol shel Mincha, he should daven Mincha, v'achar kach shel Musaf. And afterwards Musaf. Do Mincha first and then Musaf. Why? Well, no. Shazu tadira v'zu eina tadira. Shazu, that this one is tadira. What does tadira mean? Did you ever hear of the phrase tadir v'she'eno tadir kodem? There's a concept that says in halacha, tadir, something which is common or usual, versus something which is eino tadir, something which is less usual or not that usual. Tadir kodem, the one that's usual always comes first. Okay? Okay, we can always do Musaf all day long, right? Zrizin magdim in the mitzvahs, so we try to do Musaf as soon as you can do it. But here, for whatever reason, he got delayed. He didn't do Musaf right after Shachris, and now it's the afternoon. So now the question is, well, he's got Mincha to daven, and he's got Musaf to daven. So what should you do first? So the answer is, says at least the first opinion, Mincha first. Why? Shazu tadira, because this one is common. V'zu eina tadira, and this one is not as common. Meaning, very simple, Mincha is a prayer that you do every day. At least we're supposed to. Assumedly you do it, right? You're supposed to daven every day Mincha. That's an everyday occurrence. Musaf, okay, once a week, Rosh Chodesh, Yom Tov, but it's certainly not as often as Mincha, right? Well, when we have this, that's the old rule, right? Tadir v'she'eno tadir, whichever one is more common, that's the one that goes first.
I would have thought that which happens only once in a while, more rare, that should come first.
Okay, yes, perhaps. One would think that maybe that has a chashivas. But the Gemara actually says that the one that always comes first always comes commonly, that comes first. We learn it from a pasuk, actually. The Gemara learns it from a pasuk. The pasuk says that all of your karban musafs, all have to come after the daily morning chakras, the daily morning sacrifice, right? And it always says, Al olas hatomid yasa v'niska. On the olas hatomid, and the Gemara says, you know why? Because the olas hatomid is common. Tomid, it's always. And from there we learn a pasuk that says, whatever is the common thing, that goes first. There are lots of examples of this, by the way. I'm just going to digress for a minute. For those of you who put on a talis, so you put on the talis or the tefillin first? Put on talis first. Talis first. And then tefillin. You know why? Tadir v'she'ena tadir, tadir kodem. The one that's usual, more usual, that's the one that goes first. Talis you wear every day. Tefillin you don't wear on Shabbos. Therefore, talis is more common. Talis goes first.
I learned that if one accidentally goes out the phone first, they should put it on.
That's because that then you have a conflict between tadir kodem, between which is more common first, versus ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. There you have to pass over mitzvahs. Since you reached your tefillin first, then if you would then put the tefillin aside to go for your talis, you would be essentially pushing away the tefillin in favor of your talis, and that would also bring an issue of ma'avirin ala mitzvahs. You don't want to insult a mitzvah by saying, okay, we'll push this aside for a little while. You don't want to do that. So there it becomes a conflict of that, and in such a conflict, you usually go with ein ma'avir al mitzvahs. That takes precedent over tadir. So that's why the poskim say better is that you should put your talis in the front of your bag, so you hit your talis first, and that way you put on your talis first, and you don't get you. Then only later you can get to your tefillin. But that's the reason why you put your talis on first, is because that it's tadir kodem, right? That the more common thing that comes first. There are many, many, many examples. I don't have to go into other examples, but there are many examples, common day examples of this idea that tadir v'shein tadir kodem. Okay, so getting back to our discussion. So the first opinion says, if you've got mincha and musaf at the same time, you didn't daven musaf earlier, and now it's the afternoon, and you got to daven mincha and musaf, what do? Mincha first. Reason? Shazu tadira v'zu eina tadira. This one's usual, this one's less usual, right? Good? Okay, so far, so good. Yeah, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda says, Mispal shel musaf, ve'achar kach shel mincha. Daven musaf first, and then mincha. Why? Shazu overes, v'zu eina overes. This is what you were talking about, Aaron. Because this one will overes. Overes means it will pass. And I don't have it here, but Rashi explains this very obviously. Rashi says, well, this is because Rabbi Yehuda himself is going within his own logic, right? What they call lishitaso. Lishitaso means he's going according to his own view, his own logic. Within Rabbi Yehuda's own view, that makes perfect sense. Why? Because Rabbi Yehuda held, how long do you have for Musaf? Only until the end of, until 7 hours, right? That's all. You don't have all day. Oh, well. Well, if you don't have all day and you've got a significant time limitation on Musaf, which you're not going to have on Mincha, because Mincha you have plenty more time, right? Oh, so then, of course, if they're not the same amount of time you have, right? Therefore, you have to hurry up your musaf because you're about to run out of time. See, according to the first opinion, you got plenty of time. You got the whole day, and you got it till 12 for both. So there's no particular reason why I should have to rush one over the other. Until 12 hours, till the end of the day, right? Well, okay, so then they're both equal in terms of time limitation. So I go with the old rule. Whichever one is more common, that's the one goes first. That's the old rule, fine. So according to the Tanakama, that works perfectly. According to Rabbi Yehuda, though, since you have a strong time limitation on your musaf, namely 7 hours, whereas mincha you're going to have plenty more time, at least until plaga mincha, but you have still plenty more time than that, right? Well, so then, of course, you want to make sure you do your musaf in quickly because you don't want to miss it. If you start playing around with mincha, you may end up missing musaf altogether. So, of course, in that case, you should, of course, put musaf in front to make sure you get it done, and then you have time for mincha later. So that will overrule your normal being early. You know, do the one you do is more common. Good? That's what the Brisa says? Very good. So let's summarize the Brisa. The Brisa says that if you have two prayers in front of you, Mincha and Musaf, which one should you do first? So the Tanakama's opinion, the Rabbanan, according to their own logic and reasoning, you should do Mincha first. Why? Because Mincha is the one that's more common, Musaf is less common, Mincha comes first. Right? And that's because they hold that you have plenty of time. You have both until the end of the day, so you should put the more common one first. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, put the Musaf first, because you're going to run out of time soon for Musaf, whereas you have much more time for Mincha, therefore be on the safe side and put Musaf first. Good? Okay, very good. Everything's great. Now the Gemara says like this. Now, let's step back here for a minute and let's think about this brisa here. Mara says, obviously the brisa is talking about a case where you have an overlap of Musaf and Mincha, right? There must be a time span in which that you can find yourself being obligated to do both Musaf and Mincha, and that's the question in the Brisa, which one comes first, Mincha or Musaf, right? But the whole Brisa is only relevant if there is such a time span. If it is impossible to have such a time span, then the whole Brisa is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's like asking, which one should you be more careful with? Should you be more careful with Havdalah or washing your hands in the morning? I mean, they have nothing to do with each other. They're not in conflict. They're not. There's nothing. Huh? What kind of question is that? Like they don't come at the same time. So what does it have to do with it? The whole premise of this brisa is that there is a span of time in which you have both Musaf and Mincha, and therefore the question arises, okay, so should you put Mincha first or Musaf first? But obviously there must be a span of time in which that they can overlap. Aha! So now let's go on, says the Gemara. Now just a second here. I amrat bishlama. Again, what does that mean? It's good if you say, right? Invert it, right? I amrat bishlama. It's good if you say ad ve'ad bichlal, up till and yes, including. Hainu, that is the mishkachas lehu, that it is found, meaning that it is possible to be found, shtei tfilos, two prayers, b'harei hadari. Harei hadari means together at the same time. Meaning, if you say up till and including, then it is theoretically possible that you could have two prayers overlapping at the same time. Meaning, well, let's look at the chart. Where do you daven Musaf according to Rabbi Yehuda? Up till the 7th hour. Is that up till and including, or up till and not including? Well, according to what we've been saying until now, we should be up till and not including, correct? All right, well, that would mean, therefore, that you can daven Musaf only until the beginning of the 7th hour, otherwise known as the end of the 6th hour. The end of the 6th hour is Chatzos Hayom. Right? That's midpoint of the day, right? Mincha is only after that, right? Mincha starts at Chatzos Hayom, or maybe even half an hour later. We discussed that already, right? But even at the earliest point, it only starts at the end of hour 6, right? From the beginning of the 7th hour and on, right? That's when Mincha starts. Now, if Musaf, according to Rabbi Yehuda, only goes until the 7th hour, and that means up till and not including, that means that, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Musaf only can go until the end of the 6th hour. Mincha only starts at the end of the 6th hour, which means that the two prayers could not possibly overlap. Otherwise known as, this brisa makes no sense. Right? Right? This brisa is impossible. It's discussing a scenario which is impossible to ever occur. How could the brisa discuss a question of, do you do Musaf first or Mincha first, if it's a moot question, because they'll never be able to overlap? Good question. Very good question. Obviously, the brisa is assuming up till and including. Up till and including, then the brisa makes sense. Because then Rabbi Yehuda says up till and including the 7th hour, right? Oh, well, so then you do have an hour overlap in which you could theoretically daven Musaf and Mincha at the same time. Oh, that makes sense, right? Then the brisa makes sense. If you would say up till and not including, then the brisa is irrelevant. So that's what the Gemara is now saying. Let's see it again inside. The Gemara says, I amrat bishlama. It's good if you say ad ve'ad bichlal, up till and yes including. So when Rabbi Yehuda says the word ad sheva shows, he means up till and including the 7th hour. That's good. Hainu, that is the mishkachas lehu, that it will be found for you. You will be able to find, it will be possible to have shtei tfilos b'hadi hadari, 2 prayers together, meaning Musaf and Mincha. There is at least the possibility of having 2 prayers simultaneously at the same time frame. You can have Mincha and Musaf, and they overlap. Hence the Brice's question, do you do Mincha first or Musaf first? Okay, that's a relevant question. But Ella, but amrat. But if you say ad v'lo ad bichlal, up till and not including, if that's what you're saying, so the Gemara says, huh? Heichi mishkachas lehu. Heichi means how. How could it be found? Shtei tfilos, 2 prayers b'hari adori, together. How can you have 2 prayers at the same time? That is a physical impossibility. Kevan, since the asyala shel mincha, since that comes to you, that of mincha, which is a funny way of saying it, but it means once the time for mincha has come, Ozlala has already gone shel musafim. It has already left that of musaf, which means they don't overlap. Once you get to the end of the 6th hour, the time of musaf is already finished, if you hold up till and not including, right? So then the time for musaf is finished, and only then you're beginning the time for mincha. So it is irrelevant. You can never possibly have an overlap of those 2 times. So the brisa is completely irrelevant and impossible. Well, we seem to have painted ourselves into a little bit of a corner here, huh? This brisa clearly indicates ad ve'ad bichlal, up till and yes included. But before we said that we seem to have had an ironclad proof from the Plag HaMincha business, right? That it was up till and not including. We got a problem. We got a serious problem here. So what is, will the true odd please stand up? What's going on here, right? Are we in or are we out? What's going on over here? So that's what the Gemara's next point is. Elamai, rather what? Ad v'ad bichlal. So you are saying what? That it means up till and including. You have proven from this story about the overlap between Musaf and Mincha, you have proven that it must be up till and yes including. So then, Kashya Reisha. Then you have a question from the earlier part, right? Reisha meaning the earlier part of the Mishnah. Ma'ika, what is there, meaning what's the difference? What difference would there be between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan? What difference would there be between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan? Again, that would come out that if you would say up till and including, so then it would seem, therefore, that there should be no difference between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan when it comes to Mincha. Because we already said that Rabbi Yehuda would then be until the last half, but including the last half. So then that makes it go up till 12, just like the Rabbanan. There's no difference. So how do you reconcile this? You're darned if you do, and you're darned if you don't, right? Well, how are we going to deal with this? That's a fair question. So the Gemara says like this. Okay, Talmudic reasoning tells us, okay, something's got to give, right? We must have erred someplace, right? Okay, these two things don't jive. Something's got to give. So the Gemara, as usual, looks for the weakest link and says, aha, that's where I must amend. That's where I must find the error, right? The weakest link. So the Gemara says, aha. Mi savrat. Who says, which basically means, who do you think? What do you think? The high plag mincha, that this half of mincha, plag achrona kamar. This half of mincha means the last half. No, it doesn't mean the last half. Plag rishona kamar. It means the first half. When we were assuming this whole time that Rabbi Yehuda said the half of mincha, he meant the latter half. Actually, that was a good assumption because the Brachos said that, right? Okay. Says the Gemara, no. Wrong. He meant the first half. Okay. Well, we've got some explaining to do. Because then you're going to have to explain what the Brachos said, because the Brachos said explicitly the latter half, right? But hold for 1 second the Gemara, and the next line is going to explain that. But you understand that if you say that it's referring to the first half, then everything's fine. Because then you could say universally, whenever Rabbi Yehuda says the word ad, it always means up till and yes, including. And he meant until and including the first half of mincha, which would bring you to what we know as plaga mincha, meaning 10 3/4 hours. Very good. Everything's fine. Okay? Now, that's great in theory. How are we going to explain the brisa that says explicitly that Rabbi Yehuda said till the latter half? What are you going to do with that? Right? So the Gemara says, V'hachi kamar. This is what it's saying. V'hachi, and this, or so, ka'amar, it is saying. Which means that the Gemara is saying, I must have a little bit of I have to tweak it, so to speak. I have to say, I know it sounded that way, but it didn't mean that. What it means is as follows. That brisa that says that Rabbi Yehuda said until the last half, I know that it sounded that way, but that's not what it means. Haki kamar, this is what it's saying. Emas, when is it? Nafik, plag rishona. When is it that the first half leaves? Nafik means leave. Plag rishona. When does it leave the first half? Which in English you would say, when does the first half leave? The ayil plag achrona, and the second half comes in. When is that? When the brisa says, and what is, when the brisa said before it that it meant half of mincha, what it means is, when is it that the first half ends and the second half comes in? That's mechinafki achas esrei shows, when it finishes, or when we have passed, when it has left 11 hours chaser revia minus a quarter. In simple English, that means 10 3/4 hours. Which means, put in simple English, we have now changed what we thought. This entire time we were assuming that Plag HaMincha was a span of time. There was the first half and there was the second half. And the Gemara says, that Brisa says, what is Plag HaMincha? Plag HaMincha is the second half of Mincha. That's what we thought that Brisa meant. Second half of Mincha. That got us into a quagmire because then you got into all these problems about, so then if it's ad v'ad bichlal, up till and including, then it's the same thing as the Rabbanan. What are you going to do? So, it must be ad v'lo ad bichlal. Well, then you have a problem from the other brisa. Right? We got into all sorts of trouble. So the Gemara says, okay, no. Wrong. The Gemara identifies the weakest link, and the Gemara says, okay, that's where I made my error. I know why you made your error, because that's what it sounded like, but that's not what the Brisa means. Hachi Kamer, this is what the Brisa means. What the Brisa means is, when does the first half leave and the second half enter? 10 3/4 hours. Even though that's not the simple explanation of the Brisa, admittedly, that's not what the Brisa sounded like, but that is what the Brisa means. Which in effect is saying, Plag HaMincha is not a span of time, but rather a point in time, which is the way we generally use it, right? Plag HaMincha means the midpoint of Mincha. It does not mean the first half or the second half of Mincha. It means the midpoint of Mincha. Now we understand. If you're going to interpret the Brisa that way, then everything falls into place. Very good. So when the Gemara had said, when the Brisa had said before that it meant until Plag Achrona, which is 11 hours minus a quarter, which is 10 3/4 hours, right? Plag HaMincha. What he meant is until the Plag, meaning when's the point where the first half ends and the second half begins, meaning midpoint? 10 3/4 hours. That's what the Brisa meant. Oh, then very good. Now everything's fine. Really, ad bichlal, up till and including, which is why we have that possible Brisa, that the Brisa is a possibility where you can have Musaf and Mincha simultaneously at the same time. Yes, because ad bichlal, up till and including. Very good. And now we understand why there's a distinction between Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan in Mincha. Because he didn't mean up till the second half, he meant until the midpoint. And Plag HaMincha was a point in time rather than a span in time. Oh, then we're good. Then we understand. This Machlokes, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbanan. Very good. Everything is great. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have until Plag HaMincha, until here. And according to Rabbanan, you have all the way until the end. And we're good.
And how does that apply by Musaf?
So by Musaf, you have until the end of the 7th hour. Until the end of the 7th hour. So hence you have an overlap of 1 hour where according to Rabbi Yehuda, you could theoretically daven both Musaf and Mincha. And that's why the Brisa says, according to Rabbi Yehuda, daven your Musaf first because that's about to pass. Whereas Mincha, you have plenty more time, right? Therefore, Rabbi Yehuda says, daven Musaf first, not Mincha. Right? Everything's very good. And perhaps the best part is, good news for the schluffy heads, right? Because now you get an extra hour, right? Because now when Rabbi Yehuda said in the beginning of the Mishnah that Shacharis is until 4 hours, he means now until the end of the 4th hour, right? Up till and yes, including, and therefore you have until the end of the 4th hour. Great for Sunday mornings, right? Okay, if you like davening at the 10 o'clock minyan, that's good news for the Jews, right? Okay, good? Okay, very good. There we go. We got it. Right? So in effect, this is Typical Talmudic reasoning. The Gemara had a question. The Gemara tried to bring a proof. The Gemara says, then I got a counter proof, right? And then we have to find, we got a contradiction on our hands. And then the Gemara says, okay, we're going to find the weakest link, and we're going to have to figure out how to redo this. Boom, we figured it out, right? Perfect Talmudic reasoning, right here. Perfect example of Talmudic reasoning. Okay, good. We still have a few more minutes. Shall we start part 2? Okay, good. What was that? Yeah, okay, let's go. Doesn't hurt. Okay, good. Okay. I hope it won't hurt. Amar Rav Nachman. Says Rav Nachman, Af anan nami tanina. We also learned it in a Mishnah. Okay. What Rav Nachman is about to say is, you're right. You got that right, guys. Good job. And in case you had any doubt as to whether you got it right or not, it was a little bit tricky there, right? A little back and forth, a little, I don't know. In case you have any doubt whether you got it right, Af anan nami tanina. Even we learned it in a Mishnah. That means, when you listen closely to this Mishnah, you will realize that you are correct. That Rabbi Yehuda meant up till and yes, including. And I'll prove it to you from a Mishnah. Okay? Now I'm going to run through this Mishnah, and we'll get to the part which is important for our Sugya. Perhaps next week we'll come back and do all the side points. The Mishnah is going to talk about 5 different things. Most of which, 4 out of the 5, have nothing to do with us. This is a typical Mishnah in Meseches Edios, or sometimes pronounced Edios. Meseches Edios or Edios is a Masechta Mishnayos that we always paskin like, and Edios means the best, the choicest. Those are the best ones, right? We always paskin like those. And Edios means testimonies, because the Masechta Edios, whatever, has a lot of Mishnayos in which people came up and testified about certain halachas that were in question, and they testified that this was the proper halacha. They testified, meaning that they had a Masorah, that such was the proper halacha. And they know for a fact, because they got it from Masorah, that this is the proper thing. Okay, so here's an example. Mishnah in Masechta Edios. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, one of the great Tanoim, he was one of the 10 martyrs, by the way. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, He'id Chamisha Dvarim, he testified 5 things. 5 things were somewhat questionable, and he testified on 5 things. Shememan in Esaktana. I'm not going to translate that. We'll have to come back to it later. The time does not allow us right now to testify that. To translate that, sorry. V'shemeisin es ha'isha al pi eid echad. I'm also not going to translate that. V'al tarnagol sheniskal b'Yushalayim al shahara gazanefesh. I am not going to translate that one either. V'al yayin ben arboim yom shenisnatzech al gabe mizbeach. I'm not going to translate that one either. We'll come back to translate all 4 of those. But they are completely 4 different things that have absolutely nothing to do with anything that we're discussing here. Those are 4 things sugyas that would require, each one of these would require a lengthy explanation just to simply get what the words mean. And I'm not going to go that right now. The time does not allow. Hopefully next time we'll go through each one. Okay? So those 4 he testified on, right? Manis Aktana, Mesinas Ish al Pied Echad, Tarnagol sheniskar Yerushalayim al sharig sanefesh, ve'al yayin ben ayim yom shenisach al mizbeach. 4 things. The 5th one is the one we want. The Talmud shal shachar. He also testified a 5th thing, which is, and on the morning sacrifice, shekarav be'arba shos. That the morning sacrifice was brought in the 4th hour. Be'arba shos, in the 4th hour. Oh! Did you hear what the Mishnah said? The Mishnah says, he didn't testify it was brought until the 4th hour. He says, in the 4th hour, be'arba shos, in the 4th hour, right? Shma mina. We hear from this. Ad ve'ad bichlal. Up till and including. Clearly the Mishnah over there in Idios is going like Rabbi Yehuda, right? Because the 4th hour, according to Rabbanan, is like, what's the 4th hour? What's the big deal about the 4th hour? And you still got more time. You still got until midday, right? Clearly the Mishnah is going like Rabbi Yehuda, right? That you only have until 4 hours. And the Mishnah is testifying, the Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava is testifying, it can be done during the 4th hour, right? So Rav Nachman says, guys, good job. Yes, it is up till and including, and I can prove it to you from a Mishnah, because the Mishnah says clearly that the Talmud Shal Shachar could be brought in the 4th hour, right? Not up till the 4th hour, in the 4th hour. Oh, Shma Mina, we hear from this, Ad ve'ad bichlal, up till and yes, including Shma Mina, we hear from this. My Rebbe, who first taught me the Shma Mina, da-da-da-da, Shma Mina, right? When you do that, Shma Mina, da-da-da-da, Shma Mina, he said in Yiddish, it says, Gekonchit. Gekonchit means, that's the end. End of discussion. Final. Whenever you have a Shma Mina, da-da-da-da, Shma Mina, that means, that's it. We're done. We're finished. That's proof. That's it. Ironclad. That is the conclusion. So we have just proven without a doubt that we were right, that it means up till and, yes, including, and we have until the end of the 4th hour for Shacharis, the end of the 7th hour for Mincha, for Musaf, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right? But we only have until Plag HaMincha, according to Rabbi Yehuda, midpoint of Mincha, right? That is the way that the Har Gemara came out, the Halacha L'maisa. Good? Everybody with? Good? In Mitzvah Hashem, next week, we will try to pick up on those 4 other things that he testified on, but it has nothing to do with anything that we're discussing here. Totally separate subjects, and it's a whole event to try to explain to you what all those 4 other things is. It's interesting, but it's a totally different thing. It's a flight into different mesechtas for different things. Okay. Anyway, have a good evening. Shkoyach.